And welcome to the Criticaleye Asia podcast, Inspiring Leaders to Succeed. I'm Holly Carmichael, Head of Research and Market Development, APAC at Criticaleye, and I'm delighted to host this episode. These podcasts engage on subjects at the forefront of business leaders' minds, always topical, thought-provoking, and enabling you to learn from leaders and peers delivering amazing results, unpacking leadership and making it bite-sizable. So we're here today to discuss stepping up to the Group CHRO role, which we do a huge amount of work on globally at Criticaleye. And I feel very fortunate to be joined by Joydeep Bose, Managing Director and Global Head Human Resources at Olam International, based in Singapore, who will share examples on how best to elevate yourself as a prospective Group CHRO, focusing on credibility, business impact, and relationship building. So Joydeep, great to have you here today. And would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Thank you for having me here. As you mentioned, I've been in Olam for a very long time. It's been more than 2 decades that I've been in one single organization. When I joined this company, it was virtually a startup, and I've been with it from a kind of a 0 to 1, 1 to 10, and a 10 to 100 stage. Today, we are $50 billion in our revenues. We are a food company, a food and agricultural company. So we produce ingredients and products that go into chocolates, go into coffee, go into different food materials, which uses edible nuts. So that's us. We are headquartered out of Singapore. I've been an HR professional, but I started off as a technocrat. I was an engineer in my last life, and I've been in human resources for the last 30 years or so. So that's me.
Excellent. Thank you, Joydeep. Fascinating career, and really looking forward to your insight, learning more from your own career. I think the role of the Group CHRO is an incredibly challenging one. So let's get in and explore your very interesting perspective on this and any advice that you would give to somebody who is looking to step up into this great opportunity. So Joydeep, where would you like to begin?
Yeah, sure. So you brought out those 3 elements of building personal credibility, of having business impact where you can move the needle, and then forging relationships. So we could start with the first one, which is building personal credibility. And I would look back at my own career and careers of other successful CXOs, not just CHROs. And in each of these roles, having that credibility is extremely important. For a CHRO, and this is true not just for a CHRO, but even early on in an HR professional's career, how do you build credibility? And some of the ways that I have seen that have worked are when we go out of our way to solve problems of others. And these others could be other stakeholders, could be peers, and we taking an interest in going out of the way, understanding their problems, and directly being able to solve their problems. And if one can do that, one can instantly build a rapport with the other person. So some examples of how I've been able to solve some problems and examples of problems, like very often one comes across relationship issues, interpersonal issues between peers or between a team member and a supervisor at senior levels, and sometimes at senior levels. So getting in, understanding the situation, perhaps having a couple of conversations and being able to sort out some of these issues. And if one can do them successfully, one immediately solves a very critical problem and gets, again, credibility established. So that's one way of establishing credibility. The second way of establishing credibility, as we all know, is meeting commitments. In a human resources area, we deal at any point of time with innumerable issues. Some of them urgent, many of them very important. And therefore, and I'm generalizing here a little bit, we do not often meet commitments in terms of timelines or closures on all of them. But it's important to, therefore, being able to prioritize and making commitments on timelines and closures and ensuring that we're meeting them. And also, in some ways, communicating that they have been met and closed. So this is, I've found, another way in which business leaders look on HR professionals in a very favorable manner when they see that they are also meeting commitments, hard commitments, as business leaders also need to meet. So that's one way of establishing credibility, which is making commitments and meeting those commitments. The third way of personal credibility is, and especially in a CHRO's role, we have privileged access to key stakeholders. And when I say key stakeholders, there would be the CEO, of course, CXOs, sometimes board members. And how do we use that access that we have in a very judicious and objective way? That becomes extremely important. If I don't want to use terms like politicking, but obviously we don't politic, but then it's important that what we say, what we don't say, we do it very consciously so that we are seen as impartial and objective. That also immediately establishes credibility within the organization. Finally, one style of operating, if one is open, is accessible, it crowdsources views of, again, stakeholders and others, involving them in key decisions, that also establishes credibility as, again, in terms of driving home that the person is objective in a lot of what the person does. So these are some of the ways in which one can establish credibility. So, Holly, any questions from your end on them?
Absolutely. A question, Joydeep. How important is a sense of realism when it comes to building and maintaining credibility? So, for example, as the HRD, rather than saying to the board, I have everything under control, to say instead, we're working through this challenge, here's what we're doing, we're being really responsive, we're trying to learn as much as possible. How important is that in your experience?
No, absolutely. And then today's board members, in their roles, being accountable to shareholders, they expect to be fully informed. And therefore, it's always prudent to give a very realistic picture of what's of the issue of the subject. So, and in many instances, or at least in some instances, things could be still work in progress. So it's important to get that across, that not everything is under control. We are trying, we are open to help. But this is what we are doing. We look forward to your advice on this matter. And this is still work in progress. So that's important. And that's how I think board members today expect from executives. It's important to align CEO with communication that is going out to the board. It ensures that there's no surprises for anyone here. It always has worked when I've been transparent, candid, and objective.
Okay. Once you have that credibility established, how easy is it to maintain? How quickly can it dissipate?
I don't think it disappears immediately, unless, of course, there is something that happens which goes against integrity or in that direction. But I don't think credibility goes off in an instance. There are honest mistakes that we all make, and often our decisions don't go right. But if we own up to those decisions, we take accountability for it, it often adds on to your credibility. It certainly does not discount your credibility. But if those decisions are based on personal interest, or there's a conflict of interest involved somewhere, then of course, it diminishes your credibility and sometimes completely. So credibility once built does not get discounted or damaged by mistakes that one can make. In fact, if one takes risks, depends on the environment of the organization, and those risks, some of those risks have not worked out in the manner that they were intended to. I think that enhances the individual's credibility in some ways.
Okay, it's such a great theme to be able to start with, Joydeep. Let's now move on to the second item that you think is really critical to an aspiring group CHRO's success. So where would you like to go?
Yeah, we could go to the second point, which is having business impact. And when I say business impact, and they're kind of related. I mean, when you're building credibility, you need to have business impact as a CHRO, otherwise you can't establish credibility. But business impact is more in nature of, again, the function is such that there is always in the function what we call a scope creep. You keep on adding more and more stuff to your work list, what you need to accomplish. And most of us find ourselves always busy, always in meetings. And then we lose sight on what are those few key priorities where we need to move the needle on, that we have to make an impact on. So it's always very important. And for instance, even today, I know what are the three things that I need to accomplish this month. And the three things that I need to accomplish and get them out of the way and bring a closure to them. And so having that ability to identify your big rocks, so which are your big rocks and how are you ensuring that they're getting done and who is working on them and reviewing those projects and getting them done. And clearly these are the areas which hopefully will be moving the needle for the organization. So being able to identify the areas of one's work which have business impact, look at them as projects in a nature, in a form of speaking, look at them as projects where there is a clear picture of what success should look like. Often we start off something without figuring out what success should look like. Having done that well, what would that look like? But ahead of, even before we start, we should be clear about what success looks like, and then going on and delivering that in the form and manner that we would have envisaged. So looking at key priorities and delivering on them. In our organization, when people do that, we call them that we use a term heavy lifting, that there has been some heavy lifting that has been done, and that has clearly moved the needle. And the other part is, as a CHRO, measuring in terms of value. Are we creating value? Are we preserving value? And which in some way, bringing it down into a monetary impact. At least some of the work that we do should have a monetary impact, which is defining a value for it. And then I think I gave this example earlier. One example was this, we have a huge incentive budget. And like most organizations, 40-50% of annual compensation is variable in nature. Now, did an analysis on to what extent this variable compensation is actually driving results. And because we want variable compensation to drive results, analysis, and we found that some of our highest earners were not necessarily the most consistent performers. They may have performed that year, but the following year they may not have performed as well. And we presented it in the leadership team, and we felt that we need to have a change in our incentive scheme so that we get the right results from it, that it drives behavior that leads to superior performance. So data-driven analysis, looking at the problem, being able to segregate the problem and come up with the right set of solutions, and then implementing it so that, again, it has a business impact. And then we say that for X number of dollars that we are spending on incentive, we are getting a Y performance enhancement. Trying to build that correlation, then in some ways, you're talking the language of the CFO. So CHRO and the CFO are on a common plane, and then the CHRO is seen to create direct business impact. So that's a bit complicated. Not every element of what we do can be brought down into value in the form of measuring it in form of dollars. But to the extent that we can, we should attempt to do it.
Okay, great. And how important is it for CHROs to work with different business heads to understand the business and direction? I mean, you mentioned alignment, and I think it's fair to say that world-class CHROs they should be proactive around bringing global trends to the board, which could then have a major impact on business and be able to clearly articulate that. But in terms of kind of the focus internally, how important is learning from different business heads?
Yeah, so like any other CXO has to be in the business. We must know what creates value in the business, what is driving, what are the clear factors that drive value in the organization. How does the business make money? What are the factors that drive growth for business? That's just bread and butter. That's where you start from. That's one. Second is, most organizations and many are realizing that the direct way to make impact is to be quick in creating empowered teams that address issues. And these teams are given the mandate to solve the issue. Similarly, at the leadership team, also I believe that's the easiest way to make impact, where if there is a problem, leadership team members should come together quickly, and together they should come up with clear definition of the problem, find out what could be the root causes, and then address those root causes, and together solve the problem as a rapid action team. And in our organization, we've been trying to do that. If there is a problem, the head of marketing, head of sales, or head of HR come together. And then we say that this problem is what we need to address, get enough data around that issue, and then come up with what are the root causes and the solutions. And then together, we execute on the solution. We drive home a solution to that problem from our own perspectives. So it's essential to know how business operates, what drives value in the business, what are the factors that drives growth, what is our overall goal and strategy. And then when we want to address a problem, we come together, not as functional heads, not as subject matter experts in our own area, but together as team members with our own strengths, we solve problem with knowing very well that there are dependencies around us. And we take accountability for it and we solve it. So that ability to work together, that ability to bring one's insights to bear, you look back and do some pattern recognition of, have we had this problem before? It's a very new problem that we are facing. And then aligning the rest of the organization in our own teams so that solution is locked in and that things happen in the new manner that we would have laid out, so that similar issues that come up resolved immediately and doesn't have to wait for someone else to come and solve it.
Great. And Joydeep, moving on to our third and final recommendation that you'd give then to an aspiring group CHRO, what do you think is imperative when it comes to relationship building?
First is, it has to be authentic. I would like to start by saying that one has to be authentic in building relationships. While we can be intentional when we go about the process in building relationships, but we have to be authentic. We can't hack it. It gets perceived very soon. It's a game that someone's playing. So one has to be authentic. It's tough being authentic and at the same time being intentional about it. So having said that, intentional is about knowing who do I have dependencies on in order for me to be able to perform effectively. Knowing also who I may have dependencies on in the future, who can help me, who can be my sponsor, who can be my support base. So going through that quite deliberately, looking through individuals and going through that quite deliberately. And then having a playbook around how do I build personal credibility with starting off by building personal credibility with each one of them. And first reaching out and then building personal credibility with each one of them. And then going about without having initially a quid pro quo about it, that I will do this and I expect this from you. But it's just proactively reaching out, building those relationships, because energy is limited, time is limited. And in that limited time and energy to build that relationship, we do it in a focused manner, an intentional manner with stakeholders and individuals who can help us to be more effective in our roles. So they would be outside. It's more difficult and takes more energy to build that relationship with individuals outside the organization, but it is important to do so. Internally, of course, one has to do that. It's a given. You can't overstate that any further. But externally, it becomes very, very important. So externally, for me, I look at one in the profession who I consider thought leaders in the profession. So they could be all across from whom I can get ideas, thoughts, and bounce off. Not strictly mentors, but more as thought leaders. I also look at people in the industry, competitor organizations, people who are open to, who have worked in competitor organizations who are not bound by their current roles in those organizations. So how the industry is going. I also look for key people in the talent market, because I deal in talent markets. So key people in talent markets who know talent, who are aware of talent. So we keep in touch with them on a regular basis. It is extremely important to have a method to building those connections. And it starts off with a connection, then you have deeper relationships. And then there is a stage where you can have a connect where we can draw on support and help also when required. For some of our key hires that we do, what I've realized an excellent form of validating the hire before, of course, the hire is joined is through doing an antecedent verification, doing a reference check. But reference checks these days, you only get very generic statements, generic feedback. But for key hires, what I do is I try to see if there are anyone in my network who knows that candidate reasonably well. And then I call on those people to check whether they have any feedback for that candidate, positive, negative, whatever feedback. And I've seen often that feedback has more validity than the official feedback that we get through the search partner or what we get through our verification agents. So that's another example of how the network comes to of use for a CHRO. Of course, I mean, you'll often find the CHROs, they move across companies also these days quite rapidly. That's not applied to me, not applicable to me because I've been in the same organization for more than 2 decades. But that also is because CHROs do have the knack of creating networks, and that networks also gives them opportunities in terms of their career more frequently than perhaps other professions do.
Okay, great. And you've raised a really interesting point there around the value of engaging externally and how that then extends to delivering value internally as well. One question, Joydeep, you mentioned around sponsorship. Have you seen an example of where kind of the politics change of a business and the group CHRO is perhaps not as relevant and they haven't got the sponsorship anymore? I mean, how would one manage that?
So the group CHRO, obviously, if there's a mandate that still continues and the CHRO doesn't have the sponsorship, then there is an issue. There is a problem there. Then the CHRO has to go to the board and the CEO and the board explain that there is a mandate, and to execute on the mandate, there is a certain sponsorship that is required. And if the sponsorship is not there, then the mandate won't get executed on. And that's where some of the CHRO trait is having those courageous conversations. So they're having those courageous conversations, and the ability to do so in a persuasive manner is important. But where there is no mandate, and the CHRO does not have a mandate, and there's no sponsorship, then I think the CHRO doesn't have a job. There's no role for the CHRO. Okay. So it's just, but if the mandate is there and the mandate is recognized by the CEO and the board, but yet sponsorship doesn't exist, then the questions to be asked.
Okay. Any final pieces of advice, Joydeep?
You learn every day in this role. You learn every day. Situations change, dynamics change, especially at the senior levels at the board level. Dynamics change, boards change, board members change. So it's never static. It's very dynamic, and you just have to be at your game, at the best of your game every moment.
Great. Well, Joydeep, thank you so very much indeed. I've really thoroughly enjoyed hearing your insight on this topic around stepping up. And thank you also to our listener for tuning into this episode.
Thank you very much.